Hey, it's JayMac, and today I'm going to share with you something that I learned the hard way that will take all of the anger, all of the frustration, all of the yelling, even the hitting out of dealing with disciplining your children. Like I said, I learned this the hard way, but I promise you that this is a solution that can work. Now, I do want to make it clear, this is for children that you can have conversations with. Dealing with toddlers is an entirely different issue that we'll deal with on another date and time. But I have to tell you, starting out, I was raised as a child who was yelled at and who was hit by my parents. And I can remember, in fact, most of my memories with my parents are me sitting there. I had done something wrong and they were yelling at me at the top of their lungs. And I can clearly remember just tuning out, just completely glazing over. And I'm sure you remember this too when you were a teenager or when your parents were yelling at you. And I'm sure you've seen it in your own children, because I can also remember yelling at my loudest at one of my children and just watching them tune out. You could just see it happen. And I found that they would tend to focus on the yelling instead of the thing that I was trying to get them to understand. And so after time, I just realized this is not working. And my wife was also raised in a home where yelling was the primary method of discipline. And she resolved never to have a house where yelling happened. And lo and behold, she married me and I was resorting to yelling. So this was generating a lot of conflict in our marriage. And so we needed to find another solution. But I realized that as a parent, we all have a common goal for our children. What is that common goal? I want to trust my children. That's what I want. I want to be able to send them out into the world and know that they will make good choices for themselves and that they'll come home safely. Ultimately, that's my goal, that I can leave the house and I can go to work and they will be at home and I can trust them. So I realized that my goal as a parent, at least as I parented, young children through the teenage years, what I wanted was trust with my children. And every time they would break that trust, that's when I would go into a rage and I'd be yelling at them and, giving them the business. And it never worked. It never worked. I never developed more trust with my children. So over time, we developed a new idea. And that idea is to, first of all, share with our children the common goal. So we sat them down and we said, listen, this is what we want for you. We're not your enemy. We're not your adversary. We want to get to a point in your life and our life where we trust each other. Where if you ask for the keys to the car, we can give you the keys because we know that we can trust that you're going to stay in touch with us. You're going to be a good driver. You're going to return home safely. We want ultimate freedom for you, our child. And that's true. That's exactly what we wanted. And what we realized and what we told them is that every time they do something right that earns trust, then their freedom expands because they have proven themselves. So now we're going to open up their world with a little bit more freedom. And every time that they did something that burned trust, then their freedoms would contract. And once we had developed this idea of expanding and contracting freedoms, all of the anger went away. All of the yelling, anything physical. Now, we didn't hit our children. We did spank our children when they were young. And I would not do that again. I would not go down that path again. But all of the anger went away because what would happen is when one of my children would come home and they had done something wrong, we would ask them, what did you do? What is the problem with what you did? And they would say, well, I burned trust. And we would say, that's right. And so what is going to happen? Well, my freedoms are going to contract. We actually programmed our children to get to the point where this is something they knew and they understood. And the beauty of it was that the anger was gone. I mean, so often as parents, we take it personally when our children do something wrong. It's like they've assaulted us. And that's not really true. What has happened is they are young, their brains are still not fully developed. They made a choice against something that we had asked them to do. It's not like they had made fun of our mother or anything like that. The reality is they had burned trust. So suddenly when we had this language and this knowledge and understanding and we shared it, then all of a sudden the anger went away because we could have open and easy conversations about what happened, what is the consequence of what happens, and how do we get trust back? And so we had so many conversations over time where we'd say, what did you do? And they would say, I burned trust. And then we'd say, okay, what can we do together to put you back in a place where you can earn that trust back? And we would have a conversation and we would have a plan. And when they earned trust, just as important, don't ignore it. Let them know, hey, you've been doing great. And because of this, we're going to expand your freedoms. So they all knew at an early age that in our house, they lived in a world not of anger and not knowing when your parents are going to get mad and not knowing, you're going to get grounded or anything like that. They knew that in their world, they could have as much freedom as they wanted if they would earn it. And they also knew that they could lose all of their freedom if they earned that too. Now, the beauty of this is that it meant that each child could be at a different stage. I know we like to think that we're going to treat each of our children equally, but that's not reality. And let me just bust that myth right now, because our children are not equal. They're not even close. They come with their own personalities. I have a child who would listen to everything that we would ask. I have a child that would listen to nothing that we would ask. So that makes it very hard to have the same parenting style for each one of your children. And sometimes I've seen parents who their first child is just an angel and they're wonderful. And the parent thinks, man, we are such great parents. And then the second child comes along and it is the worst, most disobedient child. And they're like, oh my gosh, what did we do? Well, what I love about expanding and contracting freedoms is that each child can be in a different place and they understand why they're in a different place. So there were times in our lives where the oldest had fewer freedoms than a younger sibling. And the reason for that was because the oldest had burned trust. And there were times when the youngest had more freedom than the other kids because they were following and they had earned more trust. There were times when all of them had burned a lot of trust. So this is something, this world of expanding and contracting freedoms, I'm telling you, it's in many ways it saved my marriage. In another way, it saved my relationship with my children because we were no longer yelling at each other. We were no longer arguing with each other. Now, obviously, they didn't like it when they got in trouble and they burned trust. But the other part of expanding and contracting freedoms is that there needs to be clarity about what types of things earn freedom and what types of things burn freedom. I think we have a tendency as parents to not be clear about things that get us frustrated with them. And there's nothing worse that you can do to a child than walk in and see them doing something and get angry with them, and you had never told them that that was not something that they could do. When you're in that world, how does your child know what burns trust and earns trust? There's no way for them to know. And when you create an unknown environment like that, what happens is your children, I believe, just run away from anything you say, and they decide to do whatever they want because they think they're going to get in trouble either way. And that's really a problem in a household where the majority of the interaction with a child is negative. So all they hear is from dad complaining when dad comes home, or all they hear from mom all day long is mom telling you all the things that you're doing wrong. I believe that in these cases, you're actually giving way to your children to do those things anyway, because they adopt kind of a why try mentality. I mean, you think about this. If you are an adult and you're at work, and no matter what you do, your employer is going to get mad at you, criticize you, whatever, you're going to slip into something that I've called for years. I've called it minimum expectations mode. This means you're going to do as little as possible. You're going to stay under the radar. You're going to collect your check and go home. There's a new name for it, even though I've been talking about it and other people have been talking about it for decades. The new name for it is called quiet quitting. Well, quiet quitting can happen in the home as well. If you are constantly negative towards your children, if you don't clearly identify to them how they can earn trust and how they can burn trust, then they're going to become quiet quitters. They're not going to want to be around you. They're not going to be very inclined to listen to you, because if they're going to get in trouble no matter what, then why follow the rules? So this idea of expanding and contracting freedoms, it actually turns out to be incredibly productive. Now, they're not always going to love it, and it's going to be hard for you as a parent to want to sit there and not tear their hair out and to be calm with them and to go through this process. It's not easy, but once you've all trained yourself to this idea of expanding and contracting freedoms, I promise you the anger disappears. The focus is now not on the yelling. The focus is now on what happened. How do we fix it? How do we return to where you can earn trust again? And I'll give you a quick example before I finish up here. When mobile phones first came out and kids started texting, this was, to me, one of the greatest tools that I could use to help them earn trust or burn trust. So I'll give you an example. I had one of my children who had burned trust. And because of that, I set up their phone that it would turn off an hour before their bedtime. And so they would be, mid-text, and suddenly, boop, the texting turns off. And they could not stand it. And I'm like, hey, let's get some trust going again, because what they had done involved their phone. So I'm like, let's get some trust. Here's what I need you to do. Do this for a couple of weeks. Let's get this trust back. I want you to have a phone. I want you to be able to use it. I want to trust you with that phone. And so my child worked hard to earn that trust back. And on Christmas Day, one of their favorite presents, and they will tell you this, that this was one of their favorite presents, was they earned back that 1 extra hour of texting. And that didn't cost me any money at all. So it was a great tool. So I want you to think about this. I want you to share your experiences with me. Have you tried anything like this? Burning trust, earning trust, expanding and contracting freedoms. I want to remind you that I have covered all of this in great detail in my online course. You can find it at jaymcfarland.com, where I share this and a lot of other hacks and tips and tricks on how to make parenting easier. In fact, I call it Joyful Parents, because I do believe that parenting your children can be a joyful process, but we need to kind of step back. And if we can employ systems that keep us away from the anger and focusing on the activity and how to remedy the activity, that is a win for everyone. I'd also love it if you like this content to subscribe and like, so that we can share it with other people, and so we can get rid of parents who are yelling at their children and helping them instead to grow and progress and to get to that point where they finally have ultimate freedom because they're full-fledged adults and you've helped them know how to deal with that freedom.